Hey, everybody, I'm Sean Robinson,
I'm Carson Grubaugh.
and we are Living the Line. And today we're going to be talking about a book that you and I have been sort of nibbling around the edges of for a while here.
Yeah.
Very excited to talk about it, and that is The Tower by Francois Schuiten and Benoit Peeters. And Benoit Peeters is a French writer, and Francois Schuiten is a Belgium artist. And so, Carson, you were telling me right before we started talking that this is part of a larger work or a larger series. Is that correct?
Yeah. So you were saying that you've had this book but never read it?
Yeah, this is a book that just appeared. I used to live in Seattle, and I used to go to these Seattle library sales, and they would have these so-called Friends of the Library sales twice a year. And what that basically means is that people who have good hearts and give libraries good books, the libraries take those stacks of books, and instead of putting them on the shelf to circulate, they put them in their dungeon and they sell them every 6 months. And so these so-called friends of the library, is one of them, gave this copy of the 1993 NBM edition of the Tower to the Seattle Public Library, and the Seattle Public Library said that will be $1 in the future.
Oh,
And
wow.
so I bought this beautiful book for $1, and it's hung around for a while. Those of you all who have read The Strange Death of Alex Raymond and will see the Carson's ending, well, I realized that when you and I were actually texting in a flurry about what you were going to do about the ending of Strange Death, that I must have pulled this from my memory for a particular suggestion that I made. Um,
Oh, yeah,
and
that makes sense.
Yeah, but I had never actually read it, and we'll probably talk about that when we get there. But
Yeah.
I've never actually read it until this week from your prompting. You wanting to talk about this, and man, what an amazing book! And I'm really looking forward to chomping at the bit to talk about it.
So
So
you
let's.
just like looked at the art but never read it.
That's
Um
right.
yeah, so you don't understand then like the cooler, greater thing that it's a part of. I don't remember when I first came across this stuff. I know I've had like the MBM edition for a long time, since the late 90s. I remember ordering it. I don't remember from where, and I don't remember how I came across it. I just know that at some point in my internet sleuthing, like I mean in the early days of the internet, late 90s, that I heard about this series, the stories of the fantastic, or the obscure cities. They're normally called the obscure cities, but the MBM says stories of the fantastic up at top. um and it was like this mysterious world that I didn't quite understand, that was like somehow connecting the real world to this fictional world, and there's these multiple fictional worlds that interlock. And there's like this greater project where they've done actual real world, because they're both like architects or something, or one of them's trained as an
Mhm.
architect.
Yep.
So they've done like real world architecture projects that relate to the books, and there's been like encyclopedias, and I just all this like extra kind of stuff around it. But it was like you couldn't really find, you'd find these little snippets of about it on the internet, and it was all built to be mysterious anyway. So I was just like fascinated with this, what is this whole thing? And I started buying these books. So there's a whole bunch of them. And I think I've got all of them. There's Fever and Urbican, and each one of them has like a different city within this fictional world, and they've each got their different type of architecture. And then NBM did a couple nice like hard covers as well, not just soft covers. So there's 2 volumes
Mm.
of The Invisible Frontier. um Brussels is another one of the NBM hardcovers. And that's, that and the Tower, those are what I had. And then I knew there was other ones, and I found like scans of them online and stuff, but they never all got released. And my old NBM copies, like this, the Tower one at least, is falling apart. And then in, I don't know the date off the top of my mind, sorry, I'm getting over COVID, so my brain's kind of stupid right now. But this Alaxis Press, let's see if I can get their little logo
Mhm.
there. they got the rights to reissue these, and they started as a crowdfunding thing, and they did The Leaning Girl, which is actually one of the wilder, more interesting books, but I think it's also kind of the intro book. And then this one, if you get it, kind of explains some of their architectural projects that they do and whatnot. So this was crowdfunded and printed, and it's a really, really beautiful book. And then somehow this Alaxis Press hooked up with IDW, and IDW and Alaxis Press are releasing all the ones that haven't come out. So that includes Samaris, the Theory of Grain of Sand, and A Shadow of Man. And then there's a couple other ones that haven't come out yet. And then re-releasing some of the ones like The Tower, so that it's all, you know, in the same format and everything. And so it's this huge, like, as cool as The Tower is, it's part of like this really kind of legendary growing mythology that these guys are building. And then they are intentionally permeating it in and out of the real world, which I think is where you're kind of seeing some of the connection to Strange Death as well.
Right.
So I still don't totally understand the full scope of what they're doing. It still seems a little bit mysterious to me. We're only going to talk about The Tower today, but for people who have never been introduced to this, just know that it's like this really cool, interesting, expansive world. And luckily IDW and this Alaxis, whoever, just probably one guy that runs this Alaxis Press, are making sure that the whole Obscure Cities, and now it's actually under the name The Obscure Cities, which is the proper one, not the Stories of the Fantastic. So yeah, there's a way bigger, it's like this way bigger, cooler thing.
Yeah, and the tower is certainly a really fantastic entry point for it. At least
Yeah.
having actually read it now instead of just drooled over the artwork, you know, it is self-contained, or could be self-contained, whether or not it actually connects to the other books or not, and gives you a really good idea of the strengths of both of the collaborators here. So we should
Yeah.
probably like start our flip through, but one of the first things you'll see is that you know, Schuiten's artwork is incredible. I mentioned before he's a Belgian artist, and as Carson mentioned, both his parents were architects, and I guess he himself trained as an architect, and that is clearly, you know, one of the first things that you notice upon you know, starting the artwork. One of the other things you might you might notice immediately, which is one of the first things that I saw about the book, this first header page there that you just passed by, is a direct reference to, in terms of format, that is a direct reference to the work of Giovanni Battista Piranesi.
Mhm.
And so we're going to come back to Piranesi several times during the book, but within the first few pages, you might notice that the main character is named Giovanni Battista.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was
Well, and
like,
that's one of those things where they bridge the gap between the real world and the fictional world, right?
yeah. This is one of those things that, you know, extremely appealing for me as somebody who was really a huge fan of you know, Piranesi, to see somebody making a reference to him. You might get excited, right? And then when you realize that the reason that they have the reference, look at this first panel there on the left. That little piece of architecture right there is, I mean, to me, an immediate call out to Piranesi's mature work. And just like the main character of the book, Piranesi started out as a stonemason,
Mm.
and ended up having a, you know, basically spending his entire life making quite amazing etchings that he and his family would sell to tourists in Rome, essentially to people who were on pilgrimage, could have like a quite amazing art object that, you know, celebrated the locations that they visited on their pilgrimage. Not pilgrimage. Another word for that, like the Grand Tour. You know, that was a really common thing for Europeans to do at the time. Anyway, the architecture that in this book is reminiscent in many different ways of Piranesi's work, including those little frontispieces throughout. So here's a here's a Piranesi ruin, And then there is a Piranesi so-called imaginary prison. And he did groups of etchings that he would sell as, like you would buy a set of them. And so here's another, ruin where essentially he's, making a picture for someone to take along. Because he was extremely skilled as an etcher, like basically like to a level that hadn't been seen prior to him. He could get an amazing range of value in his images that was very unusual. These imaginary prisons here are sort of impossible locations that he built in his mind. And these are sort of the things that he's known for now, but that was not what would not have been the thing that he would have been known for at the time. So, I mean, what are your first impressions here of the artwork, Carson?
Sorry, I turned my mic off to cough. I was trying to talk to you. I was saying, it's really interesting to see. I wasn't aware of Battaglia reading this. I just thought the art in the book was so cool. And now looking at the art on, like, now that you're telling me to go look at this and I can see it online, it's like, oh yeah, that's obviously who they're looking at. And seeing that weird, like, proto MC Escher type of like construction of the ruins, that gives like the key to what originally impacted me so much about looking at this was just the wild, like this panel here, the wild architecture, and then the etching style of his inking really had an impact on me in my late teens or early 20s or whenever it was that I was seeing this. I just don't think I'd ever seen like black and white comics that like look like etching like this, and really made me fall in love with it. It was just stunning. Like I've always wanted to be able to draw like that.
That panel you just called out right there is straight out of the Imaginary Prisons series, looking up at a bridge like that and then seeing another one above, and the impossible overlap of all the different architectural elements. So this guy Giovanni Battaglia works inside of
just by the way, in this, I didn't know, I know about the Battaglia now because in the IDW version they have some images of his stuff. In the one that in the MBM version that you have, they don't, but they do talk about like the explicitly, obviously they're not hiding the influence, naming the character after him, but in this version there's a little essay about Battaglia's work, and they have some of those images in there.
Okay, interesting. I haven't seen the essay because I only have the NBM edition.
So that's mentioned in there. But it's just interesting that you like that guy and know him, and because that's not a context I would have understood when until I finished reading it in the IDW version and then got to the essay.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that was one of the major two things that they're calling out that I was noting. The other one is so goofy, I don't know if I want to say it.
I'm interested what that is.
The main character is he's dressed and looks vaguely like the Orson Welles Falstaff. From Chimes at Midnight. I don't know if that was like something that they Chimes at Midnight is a Orson Welles movie that he essentially took all of the speeches that Falstaff has in all 3 or 4 Shakespeare plays.
So in the back here, they do talk about Orson Welles. The good on you, Sean, for catching all this. So you are among the last to have met Orson Welles, the last probably to have worked with him. Can we find out what gave you the idea of using him as the main actor in The Tower? And they said they're fascinated by his films. So they contacted him, and they talked about he was seduced by the project. He made himself available for poses.
No.
But you see, that's where they play with this in between fiction and reality, right? They'll do this little thing where they're like, he seemed fascinated by comics, that ability to give birth to a world by sheer force. He would sometimes say to us, why didn't I know this technique sooner? I could have finished my Don Quixote on the other side of the wind had he known that he could make comics instead of films.
Wow.
Uh,
Well, that's interesting. Well, that's a hell of a thing right there. I don't know if you've ever seen. Did you know that there were shorts of Orson Welles drawing on camera, and talking about the drawing that he was working on? He was an astounding cartoonist. Um,
no, I'm not a big like film buff, so
yeah, no,
uh,
he was an animal. He's on my list of like unknown cartoonists because they didn't work as cartoonists. You can see drawings that he did in his teens and early 20s, for different theater and film projects, and they're unbelievable. And he would just grab a piece of charcoal and go to town, and 20 minutes later have designed the specific lighting effect that he wanted, because he had all this stuff in his mind's eye, as a director, could tell the cinematographer the exact lens and then didn't need to refer back to the image afterwards.
mm.
um, was a nutty. You talk about pre-visualization. I mean, just had like a nutty level of pre-visualization skills. That's hilarious. That's
Yeah, I didn't know any of that. I wouldn't have caught any of that. But that's totally a thing. And I mean, who knows? They're claiming that they actually talked to him and they had correspondence with him. They said he had a correspondence for a long time with Milt Caniff and called him a remarkable boy. I stole a lot of frames from him. Um, so I don't know. That's
that I
what they're
believe.
yeah, but like whether they actually had any
Right.
contact with him or not, I don't know, because they play with reality and fiction like that. But you're right on, because they
That is
say
wild.
Falstaff fit into the universe we wanted to set up in the tower so much it seemed inevitable to make contact with Orson Welles.
Yeah, so I mean, the other thing that tipped me off about that is just the way they have him use his physicality, his relationship with the other character, the so this guy, that this within the framework of the story, they take him seriously as an adventurer, even though he's a portly guy. um he's like a he loves life. He has a
Yeah.
zest for life, and those are sort of like the embodied characteristics of the Falstaff character as portrayed by Wells,
Okay.
uh, in Chimes of Midnight. He's like a lusty guy who wants the good things, and pushes through, difficulty. So yeah, within the context of the story, this character Giovanni Battista, is, I don't know what they call him in your translation, but essentially he lives in place inside of one section of what we can only presume is a tremendous tower, and we see him go about his job in this area, at the beginning, which is to uh, repair the sections of the tower as they're damaged.
Yeah, and that's he's basically I don't see what they call him right out the gate, but he's got this gigantic area that's like his to keep, and it's all falling apart. And he's been trying to contact like the higher ups to be like, I need help, I can't do this, this is all falling apart. And he just hasn't heard from them in forever. And so he sets out to like, okay, I'm gonna contact someone because this is ridiculous.
Right.
Uh
And in the process of going to contact him, finds the tube, like a pneumatic tube that he's been, or I mean, presumably pneumatic. I guess they don't really show the device that's the way it's supposed to work. But basically, he finds the tube that he was sending messages through was like severed down the way, and he finds a huge stack of his own messages going back like 2 decades or whatever, and just can't believe that he's been communicating with nobody. And so he decides that he's going to basically figure out, he's going to deliver his message.
yeah.
And
Which is the craziest thing. Like
right,
I'm in this huge system that's in decay, and I'm gonna set out and like risk life and limb climbing across this thing to deliver my message to my bosses who I've never met.
right. And so he's trying to figure out, he's like, well, I'm not going to climb down. Right. Like it's just tremendous. So I better build myself, essentially like a glider. He's obsessed with these birds that he meets, and he builds himself like a glider that he thinks might support his weight. And this is one of those things that like you kind of have to just sort of move by and accept for the sake of the story. Um, that he could build a glider that could hold him, up aloft, or whatever. But he's really high up. He's got some kind of updraft or whatever, and so instead of taking him down, it actually takes him up, and he ends up, against his will, crashing essentially higher up on the structure than he had been before.
And starts to meet people higher up in the society.
Right.
Yeah.
And we start to get a little bit of the background for this place that he's in, and he wakes up in the bed of this guy that seems to be way more knowledgeable than he is, who has a young attractive girl with him, who's very coy. She's very interested in the strange contraption.
Melina.
In fact, will you stop at that panel? Just would you read me her dialogue at that panel? I'm very curious because the NBM edition has an excellent translation. I'm very curious.
The translation between the two is really different. I was comparing that, and it's really interesting. Which one do you want me to read? This one here.
Yeah, sure. This
middle one.
Yeah.
The middle one says, Giovanni, let me introduce you to Melina. You have her to thank. She saw you fall as she was looking through my telescope. I didn't believe her at first. Her story of the new Icarus seemed a bit fantastic, but she managed to convince me. So we went down to the edge of the sector and found you wrapped up in your odd contraption.
Okay. So actually, at least that section fairly on par. Giovanni, I'd like to introduce you to Melina. You should thank her. She was looking through my spyglass when she saw you fall. At first, I didn't want to believe her. The idea of a new Icarus seemed too absurd, but she finally convinced me, and the two of us went down to the edge of our sector. That's where we found you entangled in your strange contraption.
Yeah, it's pretty much the same thing. It's fun to note how they'll just choose it's like all the same information communicated, but you get those like little differences in wording. That's really fun.
What's her sassy line on the next panel? Because he says, I don't know how to thank you, miss. I'm sure I was quite a nuisance. Yes, well, you were awfully heavy to carry around.
Oh, well, he says, I don't know how to thank you, miss. I am touched that you made such an effort. He doesn't say anything about being a nuisance. And she says, well, yes, we did have to put in quite an effort. You were quite a heavy burden.
So less jokey, which is funny because she's got her hands on her hips and she's obviously like, not flirty, but like, like you should know what a pain in the ass you are kind of.
Yeah, she's sassing him for sure.
Yeah. Interesting.
So yeah, I was going back and forth because I've never really had two versions of something that had been translated before to compare, and I was enjoying that in reading the two. And I did note that I think this version is a little bit more formal than the IDW one. The IDW one is a little bit more playful. It's been a while since
and the NBM one is more playful.
NB, what I say,
yeah.
NMB. Yeah, the NBM one seems a little bit more playful. But it's been a while since I did that comparison, so I couldn't tell you exactly. But it was interesting to look at the two. And it's strange to me. It's an interesting thing to me that when you redo a book, like, are there legal reasons why you can't just keep the same translation, or is it just artistic that you would want to, I feel like I could do a better job?
No, I mean, you'd have to negotiate with the original translator, and it depends on what the terms of that translation was done. So if the translation was owned by NBM, like they paid a flat fee for it, they might not want to negotiate a license for their translation.
Yeah. So you'd have to change it, even if the original translation was the best. You kind of just got to change it just for legal reasons.
It just
you can't just say I came to the same conclusions.
No. You can't. No,
you have
crazy. Totally has to be negotiated, and totally depends on what the contract will be between the translator and the publisher.
Interesting.
So like something where the translation is licensed, like all the Studio Proteus stuff, they use the same translations now for the Dark Horse editions, the same one, but that's because Studio Proteus was sold by Torrin Smith, and when he sold that, he included the rights to all of the translations that they had created.
Interesting.
you get an idea of, I mean, how unbelievable the artwork is. I mean, if this were any other book that had less content, we would just be like drooling over every single panel. I mean, wow. How is
Yeah.
this guy not just like regarded as a genius of comics in English? You know, like this is some of the best comics artwork I've ever seen. I can't believe how consistent it is. I can't believe how like on model he is with all of his characters while having the just such expressive faces. You know, he shows them in a variety of lighting situations. Like he gets like cross contoury with the girl in shadow, and it never Milena when she's in the shadow, and it never like turns her into a potato.
Yeah.
Do you know what I
Well,
mean?
he did. This is a really weird thing because he did win a couple years ago. He won an Eisner for best penciler inker.
Really?
But I think it was
Interesting.
based on one of these reprints. So it's like
Uh,
old work and he won it. I'm not sure. Maybe there was some new work that came out, but he has been recognized like for how good he is. And just his ability to realize his architectural ability to realize full worlds with a consistent architectural vision.
right.
And that changes with every one of the, I mean, you've seen this one. When you look at all the other volumes and you see all the other architectural references that he's taking on and how he can realize a full fantastical world out of
Yeah.
each kind of like a modernist style and this old decaying style. And then you really get a sense of like, oh my god. And when you see him, okay, I'm not going to do like here we get they find these paintings and all of a sudden he's not doing his etching style. Now he's
Right.
doing this wonderful like watercolor color pencil mix in his
Yeah.
colors that he
And it's
paints his
stunning.
work with. Yeah, some of the
Absolutely
other
stunning.
volumes are in color like that.
That's just absolutely insane. So the gentleman that whose bed he woke up in, who has some kind of unknown relationship to Milena, the girl, is showing him basically the source of his wisdom about the tower. And he's already given us in a brief conversation more information than we ever had about the tower. He tells us about basically the history of the world, that supposedly this tower was being built to avoid war or conflict, which was an interesting thing. And then he says, oh, this is one of the classic images of the tower. And he shows us these full paintings, which, like you said, are actually reproduced in full color. Um, and he says, yes, Giovanni, that's what the tower looks like, or at least that's what it should look like.
Well, and then you get the sense like when they're talking about the tower was built to avoid war, you're getting the sense that they're talking about the Tower of Babel. And not
Right.
just the Tower of Babel, but almost like this Freudian or like this becomes like a Jungian archetype of like the collective project of man, where we're trying to get everyone together into this system that works to avoid conflict and war, but it's not gonna work. Like it's
Y-
always gonna be decayed and fall apart. And in the same way that the Tower of Babel is like that symbol in the Bible, and they're referencing like the typical Tower of Babel images there.
Right. So you've already called it an architect and or
Archetype.
archetype, and
Yeah.
you've called it a symbol. I'm very interested to hear you use both those words because was arguing with myself as I was reading, literally page for page. Is this a metaphor? Is this a simile? Is this a archetypal example of a collective unconscious? Is this because it's not clear within the context of the story, at least not in the portion that we're in yet, whether this is intended to function allegorically, whether we're taking the events that we've seen literally so far. Um, and there are some like implausibilities, but as we go along, but not necessarily they're within the realm of like sort of Hollywood blockbuster sci-fi implausibilities, like you know didn't quite think through this type of thing. It's not like there's impossible events happening throughout the entire story. So it is a very nice like it gives good friction, to not know whether we're talking about an allegory or a metaphor or whether this is just a symbol that's intended to be. The interpretation is left up to you, the reader, which I
Yeah,
quite
and
like.
when you're playing these games bridging like reality and fiction, I think that accentuates it, right? Because you can let the thing exist on whatever level of reality you want it to be. Like
Right.
there's a certain like uber truth to it
Right.
depending on how you interpret it. You know, so it's like more real than real in some cases. And I don't know. I think it's really smart. When I definitely on rereading it felt like I got a lot more out of it. And I haven't yet, but I really want to go back and read all of them because I remember reading them, you know, in my late teens, early 20s, where I wasn't super educated yet.
Okay.
You know, I didn't go back to school until after I had read these books. So I just wasn't aware of all that stuff. And I remember thinking these books were just kind of confusing. I didn't understand what they were about. And I just liked the artwork.
Right.
On this read, I got a lot out of it. It was like
Yeah.
this whole Jungian archetype, and I understood it in a way that I was like, oh shit, this is what they were talking about the whole time. And
Yeah.
and that ability to kind of unpack different things out of it. Like I remember enjoying them and thinking it was a weird, surreal little story, but that was about it. And I think that's really to the strength of the work, honestly.
Yeah, and we're gonna talk about it as we go because I think this plays in the I think you're absolutely right that by refusing to pin it into a particular method, it deepens that a lot. So yeah, he's a quick fantasy sequence here that you just pass by. He's sort of
Yeah.
dreaming that the painting is Milena inside of the painting, and she's exiting the painting, and you know he's unable to. He's trying to climb up to get her, and is
Well, you
unable to
have
do
this
so.
kind of like odalisque looking woman in
Right.
the bottom right corner here. Yeah. And then he has the dream that the odalisque kind of comes alive, and that they're obviously kind of forming a little fascination with each other
Yeah,
there.
and the explanation by Elias is who's he said who's this woman? She symbolizes the new world that was to be born with the tower. And he says, funny, reminds me of a woman I once knew, but a symbol she wasn't. Uh,
So
so
there it is right there. Like she symbolizes it, but she's not a symbol. She's a real thing too.
yeah,
Um,
and that's just about to the heart of it right there, which I really, you know, it's
well, and
quite
it's
awesome.
that same bridging of fiction and reality that we played with in Strange Death,
Right.
and that I was noting with like all the Cersei stuff. Like this, it's this strange thing that shows up, and I guess it's you have the sculptor too. I'm gonna blank on his name. Sorry, I still got COVID brain. The sculptor that sculpts his Pygmalion, is that he sculpts the,
Pygmalion. Yeah.
yeah, like this desire of male artists to use their art to instantiate their desired world, their desired reality, their desired woman, and like this desire to have like your work come to life and crawl out of the frame and be a
Right.
real thing. And then that just goes into the whole how the entire obscure cities is kind of always trying to and they do this in their other books too. Like authors will interact with their fictional ideas, or
Hmm.
characters will come out in the real world, and then apparently God knows what their essays, you know, if they actually did interact with Orson Welles, did they actually do the architectural projects that they talk about in the other books? I don't know, but that's what makes this such a weird, not
Yeah.
just this book, but this whole series is like this weird thing that I've never quite got a hold on what they're up to and what's
Well,
real. And
we're gonna have to do more and see if we can figure it out. But
yeah.
so Giovanni Battista is reading Elias's books, and basically has been given a course of study, and that course of study includes like these legendary buildings
Hmm.
that are referred to by travelers. And we see like renderings of the legendary buildings, which look strangely like some type of combination of like Venetian architecture plus Manhattan skyline. Uh,
Well, and here they're talking about the massive tower of Urbis and the high dungeons of Samaris, and that's the other books. There's a Samaris book. So
Interesting.
these are other obscure cities within the obscure cities realm, but it's never clear if they all exist in the same physical space. There's a sense
Right.
that these exist in different fictional spaces, but the characters, some of them somehow figure out how to, and you see that at the end of this book, they can kind of move from one fictional space into another fictional space, and then they set up our reality as one of the fictional spaces that people may move in and out of.
Inhabit. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a context that I don't know that you would get. Just there's hints of it in this, like they're talking about Urbis and Samaris and Alaxis, the minarets of Alaxis, and there's the ending, which we'll get to,
Yeah.
spoiler alert.
Yeah.
But without that greater context, some of that might be missed.
Yeah.
So
And so as he's learning more about this, we get a little bit an idea of the sort of existing social structure, or at least his concept of the existing social structure,
yeah,
which is that at the bottom of the tower is where all of the basically like the architects live. And he thinks Elias must have the blueprints somewhere. He knows so much, and the founders. This is where they are, right?
yeah,
And then up at the top somewhere is the pioneers. And that first image that he saw of the nude woman, the painting of the nude woman, is like his view of the pioneers. Like, here's this beautiful, perfect place up there somewhere where people have lots of food to eat. We
yeah,
can only imagine like what this poor guy is subsisting on, right? um I mean, he's probably farming for himself
yeah,
inside of
rats
his.
and
Right, exactly. But he's imagining up there the pioneers are having this delightful life up at the top of the tower where they're still building, right? And this is the romance of those paintings that he sees. And so as he's learning, he kind of realizes like, oh, Elias thinks I'm going to be the one who figures all this out. Yeah, so he's imagining what it's going to be like when he finally makes it to the end of the rainbow.
yeah. And to me, this page was, I think, the first one where in my second read, I got a sense of like the allegorical or kind of Jungian nature of the thing. He says, originally, the tower was conceived in the image of the universe. Building it was supposed to allow us to reach the different levels to permit us to gradually approach the heavens. So it's not just like a physical tower, it's almost like a body of knowledge that's going to let you ascend in the universe. It was to be more and more refined and purified the higher it got, ridding itself of weightiness, purifying itself of all defilement, attaining the soul of the tower, the goal of the structure. That was the theory, Giovanni, a symbol that the philosopher used to be better understood. So they're talking about the tower as the symbol for understanding.
Right.
But it's incredibly naive, a terrible contradiction to have a desire to build a tower instead of leaving it as an image. So like this idea that as soon as you make it concrete, you're undermining its function was really interesting to me.
Right. Yeah, no, it's totally fascinating, and they drive the point home on the very next sequence, which I hadn't even connected until you just read it right now. Um,
On the next page, or
yeah, because
here
I
with
mean,
her.
yeah, I mean, how much of that could be directly in response to this? I mean,
In what sense? I'm not following. Sorry, COVID brain. I'm not following you. Like the desire to make it concrete. Like as soon as.
it seems to me that he has some reluctance to consummate his relationship with Milena. That
Oh,
might
like
be,
as soon as you like consummate it, it spoils the fantasy of it
yeah.
in a sense. Okay, I got you.
And I'm not saying that's like a main theme or anything, but like it's telling to me that this is following directly on the course of that. Milena comes into his room at night and is has pretending to need assistance with her dress or whatever.
Yeah, and that really to me seems to get to like a lot of French philosophy about language and stuff, and
mm,
it almost has like a Platonic sense to it as well. But like Plato in a letter wrote that no serious man, it's something like no serious man will actually say what he means in writing, because it will like lock it in place and ruin it. Like you can, and that's why Plato, they think why he wrote dialogues is because in dialogue
right.
it's still alive and active, but as soon
Yeah.
as you write it, it kills it. And then a lot of French philosophy has this real deep mistrust of language.
Mm,
And so like language, I think, is the tower that we've built everything upon, right? This is how we've collaborated. This is how we come together. That's the Tower of Babel, is language. You come together and you communicate, and that allows all of our accomplishments, but it also locks everything into place and kills it, and it consummates the relationship. And
Right.
I didn't get any of that when I was like a 20-year-old who hadn't gone to college yet. But now as a 40 at the time I read it, 41 now, with a degree in philosophy and like 20 years of thinking about this kind of stuff, it's like, oh my God, this book is so brilliant. Like, I get it. And they know that they're kind of doing the same thing. They're locking a concrete symbol, but they're doing these postmodern, constantly undermining themselves strategies, which is what the postmodernists do to try and revivify the dead language, as they try and constantly undermine it. It's a bit frustrating, but I get why they do it. And they're doing that. This whole project is very postmodern in that sense. And deconstructionist. They're deconstructing the tower.
Right. Yeah, so we've got this quite amazing coital scene.
In the blankets.
Yeah, that third panel right there is just about the sexiest drawing I've ever seen.
There's a couple other ones that I would put in the running, but that is her head poking out of the blanket is pretty good. It's sexier than this for sure. I would throw in that drawing of Jaka's underwear with one pube sticking out from Cerebus. That's pretty sexy too, just because of how well observed it is.
Yeah.
Anyways,
these little like I really appreciate the attention to detail of a certain type. It says not a gynecological exam.
Yeah, thank God. Yeah.
Yeah, but you know what I mean. It's like it's a different kind of engagement with that.
Yeah. More realistic in a
right.
sense.
I also love their bed here too, and you'll see it on the next page. I really wonder where some of these architectural things came from.
Yeah, and you get a sense, like, obviously he has references, but a lot of it's just made up too.
Mm-hmm.
So he could have entirely made that up. He's just so well versed in like design movements and styles. You get the sense that he understands this, whatever design sensibility this came from, well enough that he could then make up one that fit. Right. But it's not necessarily a copy of an actual bed. And that's the power of his work, I think. It's not even just his rendering ability, which is obviously top flight. It's his ability to like use these stylistic cues to generate entire worlds.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so powerful throughout all of these works.
So here's a quite meaningful thing here. So they basically penetrate to the center of the tower and they find that it's empty inside.
Yep.
Which is quite amazing. And they're just kind of shouting into the void, and they shine their light into the void, and Milena, or he suggests that she drop a stone, and Milena drops a stone, and they can't even hear it on its way down. And they're both like aroused to passion. He just is like basically like he's got to leave, and I know you're gonna leave, Giovanni. I beg you, take me with you. And we go almost immediately to a dream that he's having. I have to say, this is one of two times that I was slightly irritated by the narration. I wish that they could have just let the dream be unnarrated and trust the art.
Okay.
To that, because he's going to explain it to Elias in the next scene anyway. Why not just let us have the visual, especially those amazing, the tower like constituting itself around him.
Yeah. Like deconstructed and constructing itself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And yeah, so the center of the tower is hollow, which is obviously both a literal thing, like this is literally how they're going to, eventually make their escape, but it's also a symbolically loaded thing as well.
Well, and that's the deconstructionist thing, is like if you can deconstruct the language enough to put yourself in the gap,
Yeah.
Like that's how you escape. But like you can never really do it because you're using language to put yourself in the gap, you know. Yeah, it's so hard to even talk about that stuff because
Yeah.
it's intentionally impossible to talk about. But like that does have that kind of function as well in the story, I think.
This misty cloud cover coming towards us, by the way, is a deliberate, like Piranesi rendering
This right
technique.
here.
Yeah.
This panel I've scanned. When we're done talking about the book, we'll take a look at this. And I've scanned from the NBM and from the IDW to see the difference in the print. The IDW one has more detail, but it's half-toned,
Right.
which isn't terrible because it's such a small halftone, you don't really notice it. But it
You
is
don't notice it.
no, I mean you notice it, but you do get a little bit more detail in the IDW. So this panel here that you're talking about, we'll take a closer
Yeah.
look at this one.
Yeah, be curious. Yeah, and so they're going to. He has decided he must go higher, and so Milena, being the adventurous spirit that she is going to come with him. And
they're going to go all the way to the top of it. Now that we've you know, kind of understood some of the tower, we've got to find the founders, right? That's what they're called. And
yeah, the founders are down at the bottom, but we're gonna find the pioneers.
Oh no,
now.
pioneers. Sorry, yeah. Who are constantly like making new parts of the tower taller and exploring further. So now they're gonna try and hunt them down.
Yeah, and instead, what they find on the way up is more and more abandoned positions. They find bones, and he's like, "Well, who are all these people?" Molina says, "Some of the tower's workers. They died without ever seeing their achievement, maybe without even knowing what they built."
Yeah,
this is an ossuary on the way up, and they meet another maintainer who's, I mean, I guess totally crazy. And has a machine that they don't understand, and he's just basically obsessed with the idea that they're going to take his machine. And they're like, "No, we don't want your machine. Don't shoot us with a crossbow. We're just going to keep on going." you know.
well, and sorry, go ahead.
It's snowing as they go up higher. Like it's just oppressively cold and.
Well, you're going higher and higher in the atmosphere, but like that's like the tangible reality of going higher. It's harder to breathe, like everything get more difficult. But when you associate that with society going along further, like the more we think about this AI stuff, it like the more and more society builds, like it almost gets harder and harder, right? Like the more and more we invent, the more it seems distressing to the type of creature that we are. We've talked about that a lot. And that's metaphorically and kind of allegorically correct to me as well.
Right. And the more that the tower is unsustainable. It can't be maintained just by holding your position. It's just impossible. And you could describe this book allegorically and say that, or not allegorically, you could describe this book by saying it's about a character who receives multiple ontological shifts over the course of a couple days.
Yeah, and how distressing that would be. Yeah,
right. And here is the biggest distress of them all: is arriving at the top and realizing A, nobody's there to greet him. B, it's already built. C, they are not at the sun.
And you'll never get to the sun.
Nope.
And all that's left, I don't know what it says in your translation. Elias was right. They've toyed with us. All that effort to end up with these few stones and that deadly staircase. Like you haven't reached the sun. The tower just got smaller. Only one person can occupy the top of this tower now. There's no other people there. Only one man can stand on it. And it's so bleak, like as this thing is a metaphor for society, like you're striving for something that will never reach. It's pretty bleak.
No, it's quite amazing. And yeah, the whole scene earlier with Alliance where they talk about this as a symbol and should have remained a symbol instead of a physical thing. I mean, it's just so powerful when you actually see it. you actually see the physical representation of it. You think about all of the tremendous waste. And, for anybody who says like, this is totally ridiculous, like, society wouldn't put all of its resources into building a giant statue. let me tell you some stories, my friends.
Yeah, no, this is entirely accurate. And really with the technology, like this is where technology is going, right? And it is going to be, I mean, the end goal, like I don't think it's our end goal, but this is going to be a discussion I can't get into right now
Okay.
because of
Yeah.
my COVID brain.
Yeah.
But I had a revelation the other night about the relationship between environment, body, and mind. And the end kind of state, if we keep on what we're going, will be a unification of mind and environment, but it will have to be a one mind if we do it right. If we do it wrong, it will be the total consumption of environment, and it will still be a unimind. So it's that idea that it can only be one thing at the top.
Right.
We can't all go there together as individuals. There's either going to be one individual who's consumed everything else, or we have to unify into a hive mind.
Right.
And we still won't have reached the sun.
And to take it back to Giovanni Battista here, what he is seeing is, basically what he was expecting to see all along is what he saw in the painting, which is all these people celebrating their great achievement at the top of the pioneers, and all of the food they're going to eat, and the beautiful women, and the strong men, and all of the wonderful society up there, that everybody who was working so hard for his lifetime, he's maintained this thing, so that people can have that experience up at the top and reach the summit of achievement. And instead, it's just this tiny little, impenetrable square.
But within that, it is the idea that it's a bunch of people. It's a number of individuals all together who are still individuals.
Right.
And that's like this idea of the utopian society, is that we're all individuals. We all have our different kind of desires, but we're somehow all getting along without any battling. And this is like, no, if you get to the top, it can only be one, whether that be a hive mind or one individual who's conquered all the others. Right. And when you get there, because you've left all the others behind, it's empty and you haven't reached the goal anyways. You've sacrificed everything that actually mattered on the road. And then it's like, okay, that's not the end of the book though. It's like, okay, well, what do we do now? And I don't know what exactly their answer is. I don't know if you have a sense of it, but
well, no, it is really something else. So yeah, they're going to travel downwards. They are traveling through the interior of the tower. And basically on the top layers here, they find all of this abandoned stuff. And they find abandoned sacks of gold, and abandoned jewels, and abandoned, luxury items, and abandoned sacks of classic rich cloth. And then finally painting frames, but it's no paintings, just nothing but frames.
The paintings were too important. They didn't want to leave them behind. So it's the one thing they didn't abandon was art,
right,
and symbolism and the creative spirit.
Their
which
dreams.
Again, with the AI stuff that we've been dealing with, it's like, oh shit, like they got that wrong. We've abandoned that before we've abandoned truck driving. But yeah.
And then and Milena pretends to be a prisoner inside of the painting, inside one of the frames. She says, I have a prisoner, my handsome master, will you deign to free me?
Well, and that goes back to his dream of desiring to free her from the fiction into the reality.
Yep. Coming, my princess, the ones who did this to you had best quake in fear. Yeah, exactly right. This is a callback to his dream. And as they go down, not only do they find more riches, and they burden themselves as they're going down here.
Because they're like, oh, look at all this free swag.
Right, exactly. And then they start to find the works, which, if you think about it, from a practical standpoint, I mean, they build all this stuff somehow.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the works are still extant. up on this massive staircase, and Giovanni gets the idea that he's going to take him down on one of these platforms,
basically down the center of the tower that they had stuck their head into earlier.
Right.
So they had kind of found like the way out of the tower by
Right.
finding the gap in between the symbols and the language. And now they're going to take I believe, the deconstructionist route of trying to put themselves in the gap between the lines of the language and the symbols. I think that's what they're suggesting, is that because that's the deconstructionist, like Derrida thing, is like, you can't.
Foucault.
Yeah, Foucault a little bit. Well, Foucault would be more like the Giovanni Battista. Actually, that's really good, because I wouldn't have made that connection. Foucault would have like the panopticon idea, but so Foucault would say that you're always trapped within the tower. If we're going to use the tower as the metaphor, sure. You're always trapped within that. He calls it the episteme of the time, and there's no way to see outside of that while you're in it. Like you can never be in it and see outside of it, and there's just no way out in his view. It's really bleak, so you're always like trapped. Then Derrida comes along, and Derrida basically says the only way you can get out of the tower is to make the tower eat itself. And that's where Derrida comes up with all of this language fuckery that he does, that has, I mean, it is tearing our society apart. The strategies that Derrida came up with are tearing our world apart, but they're
not intended for public consumption.
but they're intentionally doing that because he says, look, you can get outside of the box from within the box, but you have to make the box eat itself. And you don't know what's on the other side. You're just taking a risk that it's going to be better on the other side. And so I think that's what this tunnel in the middle is like. Up until now, you're dealing with kind of Foucault, like it's just this structure that you can't get out of. And then you get to the top of it and realize, fuck, this is terrible. And then, okay, we're just going to go down the gaps in between. I think, I mean, I could be mapping a lot onto it, but whatever.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of different ways to, I mean, one of the joys of the book is a lot of different ways to take it. And
that's Derrida too, like infinite interpretability from the audience, right, and author's intent be damned. And anyways.
So they have to cast away all of the rich stuff that they had in order to get down, because basically, if you think about a lever pulley system, they are on the wrong end of the pulley for a while, and then they're going to be on the right end, and they're going to go too fast. And so they have to sort of, in order to hasten their ascent initially. Yeah. Anyway, there's essentially like a counterweight that has to happen. As they're going down, they actually see Elias, and basically lie to him. How could I say it? The Pioneer is the top. It's wonderful. You're sure? I can't hold on. It's too heavy. We'll come back. And he's explaining to Milena, like, we've got to lighten it up in order to get down. And so they dump all the jewels, and then she, rips open her gown and is like, okay, well, this is going to go too, right?
Yeah, let's just get naked. But I think this is really poignant as well, because Elias has found the same hole that they found. He found the same gap or problem in the language. But they're almost protecting him a little bit. It's like the whole thing also has the Plato's allegory of the cave, where they ascend out of the cave, they go up to the top, they see the sun, they see the truth, which is all Plato. But instead of it, Plato, like the philosopher, would come back down into the cave and bring the truth with him. They come down the hole and they lie. They don't bring the truth with them. They're like, for your own sake, Well, he said he wrote him a letter, and I don't remember what's in the.
Well, he wrote him a letter that tells the truth, but then he throws it at him as they're going down, and it's impossible for him to get it. It's just scattered to the wind there. So he's making an empty gesture by tossing the letter at him. I mean, there's no point. He's not going to get it.
Yeah. So there's a sense of like the Plato coming back down Plato's philosopher coming back down to bring the truth, but then there's that empty gesture, and also the sense of like protecting someone from the truth and
Yeah.
just letting them continue, because like you can't handle the truth.
Yeah. And I mean, they're probably right in terms of him.
Yeah, I mean, so I found that real poignant as well. He finds the same kind of hole, but they're like kind of protecting him from going
Yeah.
down the hole. It's
Right.
like they're getting out of the tower, but the tower still exists. And to me, that's a little bit more hopeful than like what I take the Derrida strategy to be, which is like I'm tearing the whole thing down and I'm taking everyone with me. They're
Right.
finding their own kind of personal way out of it, and if people want to stay in the broke system, then so that's a little more positive to me.
And then in a fairly explicable book up to this point, if complex, we start to have fairly inexplicable things, where he finds essentially a fragment of a paint. They actually arrive at the bottom and they survive their fall, and they find at the bottom a fragment of a painting and a way out. But the way out is inside of a large painting of a war. And
Yeah.
so
And so here you have like this just stacks of all the ruins, and there's the fragment there that's printed in color. And then here you have, well, you're not sure. He says, "Good heavens, the paintings," but you're not sure if he's crawling into a painting or if he's just seeing reality for the first time,
right,
and the color is being used to represent seeing reality instead of
right.
fiction. So you don't know if he's like crawling into the painting or if that's just a symbol of you finally found the real reality. But then when you get onto the real reality, yeah, it's just war and chaos
Yeah,
again. And
right.
he's
And
still in black and white.
when we previously saw the painting that depicted this, it said, during your childhood, they must have told you about the wars that were used to devastate our continent. The tower was built to put an end to that. And the painting they show back then uh, is of bristling spears. Uh, it looks like it's an archaic thing, and
Mm,
none of the anything is recognizable. But here, this is clearly 17th century uh, armament and outfits. These essentially look like Civil War era soldiers.
yeah, bayonets and rifles.
Bayonets on the end of some type of single shot rifle. Single
Yeah.
shot because these people aren't shooting continually when they're fighting, uh, which is until you had basically like shells. You would have to load each shot individually, which meant basically it's essentially like a sword fight with a gun.
Yeah.
And he's in the middle of just absolutely just grotesque, horrible combat, and he knows which side he's on, and he's just continuing to fight. And the tower rises up in the middle of the battlefield.
Well, and he says, "I've got to put an end to this masquerade." So he
Yeah.
goes back down to the bottom. He basically, I take it, he exits society. He enters back into his primal Hobbesian war of all against all, which
Hmm.
is like, so this is what this is my interpretation of this, which only formulated just now. But this is where Derrida is trying to put us back to: collapse society, put everyone back into just anarchy. But then you're just back at the beginning, and this is my problem with that whole approach, is this idea that if we this idea that that something went wrong along the way in the construction of society, that some one psychopath influenced society to go into the wrong way where only the 1% succeed in all of this, and that if somehow we got back to our pure natural state, we could do it right this time. It's like, no, we're humans, we're always going to make the tower the same way.
Hmm.
And so he puts us back in, and you find out it is just a war of all against all in nature. And like you would just reconstruct the tower again. And so I don't know, but like the tower's kind of rumbling, and I don't know what to make of this ending.
And we get this incredible image of the tower coming up and rising up in the middle of that bleakness, and it looks like the colors are fairly dramatically different in the IDW edition than in the one that I've got.
Yeah, let me grab we'll see how much this can show on screen. Part of it's because this is on like this weird, I don't want to, is it non-coded, the version?
It's uncoated paper on the NBM. Yeah,
but it almost looks like it has toner or something on it.
Yeah, I mean, it might just be the process that they went through to do the color separation or whatever.
And then this is on like pretty glossy paper, so these are a lot brighter colors, a little bit more oversaturated. These are a little bit more rich, and these are probably more accurate, I would assume.
I was noticing the grays, whereas they're green. Those are all greens in the NBM edition. So it's also possible.
I assume this is more accurate.
Yeah, hard to say.
Who knows?
I'd be curious. But yeah, and then basically he's wondering where Milena has gone in all of this.
Yeah. I found her just when I had given up hope. Her uniform disguised her well. And she's in there.
She's the soldier next to him.
Yeah. We're probably going to try and run away, but for now we had thrown ourselves into this battle we didn't understand. We followed those motley soldiers into battle. We gutted, bashed, slayed. We learned how to use those strange weapons that kill in their thunder and smoke.
Yeah.
And that's it. That you're just, and then they have this thing here. When we came out of the battle where the soldiers triumphed, I felt that we were melting into a world that but a few hours ago we couldn't have imagined existed. There were days when the reality of the tower overwhelmed me like a formidable and crushing weight, and then other days when it disappeared from my vision like I'd never experienced it, like I myself took it to be a legend. But now I am weary. Bringing up those memories troubles me more than I thought they could. I'd like you to leave me in peace. But he then, that's all like, okay, they've left society, they've re-entered the battle, and then obviously here he's now the founder of a new tower, is what it looks like to me, because he has his portrait and he's writing his this whole book then is like his memoir of like how he left the tower, re-entered the battle, and then I'm assuming and then here there's like this statue of Milena
on the wall. Yeah,
so reconstructs, I'm assuming, some new tower is what it looks like. And that's what I was saying, is you can go through this whole deconstructionist process of ripping down the box that you're in to see what's on the other side, but it's just going to put you back into your natural state. And the way we got the society we have is because we're the type of creatures we are. And if you put us back in our natural state, we're just going to do the same goddamn thing again. So there's like this, then you go back to Foucault of like this kind of desperate loop, and the Derrida strategy doesn't work. And yeah, I don't know what their endpoint is, but it's a really rich read. And none of that made sense to me at 20, but it's, and it's making more and more sense to me talking to you about it than it did reading it on my own too.
Yeah, and so let's take it face to face here, if we can, because I think it's, the ending is more enigmatic. I accept that your interpretation might be the intended interpretation, but I think it's a little bit more enigmatic than that in terms of what the actual, it leaves it open enough that it's open, to that, to a lot of different possibilities. But the thing I kind of want to consider is, because this is deliberately positioned with Piranesi in mind.
Yeah.
I think that Piranesi is important to any potential interpretation that you have. Considering his context is probably important as well. And Piranesi lived, he was working his stuff was really popular in 1730 to 1750 or something like that, 1760. And the world that he lived in is a world in which Rome had fallen, more than 1,000. I mean, we're almost, he's much further away from the fall of Rome than we are from him.
Yeah.
So Rome was this legendary place run by legendary people who did incredible things that people of his time could not replicate. Buildings that they could not replicate. Piranesi would have been really aware of this because he had a craftsman background, and was, like I said, he was a stonemason, but he also gradually worked his way up through all these different disciplines, and his intention as an architect enabled him to develop the drawing abilities that he had. So anyway, his vantage point, from his vantage point, Rome must have been populated by impossible people. Impossible people that built something incredibly incomprehensible to from his vantage point. So like I think that viewpoint is important in sort of informing any interpretation, because they have definitely used Piranesi's artwork as raw material for the inspiration of the story.
Yeah, and I wouldn't have got any of that. Like I said, they definitely, I would have to go back because that didn't inform my reading of it. It was just an essay that I kind of glanced over at the end. I would have to go back and see what they have to say about it. They talk about celebrated by Victor Hugo. I don't know. I'd have to go back and read that to see, but it obviously is important. I think it's especially important to there, but behind the story of the tower, there is Bruegel, Piranesi, Paracelsus, Kafka, and Orson Welles
Bruegel, that's interesting.
are kind of the touch points.
Yeah.
The story was fueled by daydreams of Bruegel and a few other painters.
I guess the specific thing that I just wanted to, I don't need to make a big, deep dive into it or something like that. But the specific thing was just the idea that this guy's situation that he finds himself in could be understood from that perspective. That you might look and see like the cyclical nature of man, when you look back on an empire that used to exist, more than a millennia before, that did things that seem like impossible to modern people. That's sort of the situation that Giovanni Battista, the character, is in this sense. He knows how to make these repairs, right? But he doesn't know necessarily why he's doing them, or the sense of the overall structure eludes him. And back to the ontological shift that you talked about before, when people realize like, oh, hey, our world isn't the center. We're not the only living things in the world. God didn't make this place for us. We're one of many. Like, similarly, he doesn't perceive the structure that he's in, and he's impoverished when he does. Like, when he actually does perceive the structure that he's in, he's not for the better necessarily.
Yeah. And I think that's they don't mention it in the essay, but I think that wraps back around to that, the Foucault, and it's really nice that Piranesi is doing these imaginary prisons, because that's the thing that you're trapped in, like that perception that you're trapped in. And even when and the impoverishment comes from seeing it more clearly, because then it's kind of a desperate feeling when you see it clearly, like you just feel hopelessly trapped. And I think that is, that's something really intentional on their part, and they're lucky to have such a strong touch point. And that guy just also happened to be drawing prisons, and is that what Piranesi was up to too, like whether explicitly or just kind of subconsciously, why prisons, that's really interesting.
Yeah,
So.
and like a lot of artists, we don't know anything about him. We don't really particularly know why he drew those. He had a huge business drawing ruins and drawing like those little things that that they allude to throughout the story. These little things. He would draw like an urn, a broken urn, and he would use that as the beginning of a portfolio. So you could buy like a portfolio that was like, aha, here's all the ruins you just toured. And here's a little urn with an epigram talking about the life of a butterfly or whatever. You know what I mean? It was like, so anyway, like we don't know why he did these small folios of these prisons. I mean, he just drew them. And there are multiple states. So like he did like one edition and he went back in and kept on reworking the plates and did another edition. It's not like they were a huge seller or something like that. So probably that was some type of personal statement for him. But
Well,
anyway,
damn, I'm glad we talked about this, Sean, because the book made a lot more sense to me on a second read. But you knowing, being a fan of Piranesi, and then like that, talking to you about it has like I understand, or at least I have my own kind of understanding of what this is way more rich. I didn't think this conversation was going to get this deep, honestly. I thought we were going to go like, I don't know, some Freudian Jungian stuff and some really beautiful art, but this has been fascinating.
well, I'm just going to go ahead and toss out. It has long been my goal to get access to enough of his prints to be able to do a really fantastic edition of all of Piranesi's stuff. There is a reasonable book that has some good stuff, but all the art is not reproduced as line art because people just throw up their hands and think I can't do that.
Yeah.
But you can, and it's possible, and it would be an amazing thing. They were very large though, so you wouldn't want to do them at size. It would be a huge book, a door rather than a doorstop.
But point being, if someone has access to materials that Sean could scan, he'd be very interested in that because it would make a beautiful book.
So speaking of scanning, before we go, let's take a real quick view at those comparison images so we can take a look at what the two editions offer. Yeah, so the NBM one was done in the era of negative to plate technology, and the IDW one was not.
Okay, so this is the NBM one. I scanned these at 1200 DPI just so we could get really, really close. And just, I don't know why, but since we've been scanning things at 1200 DPI, sure, that's just my default now. So this is the NBM one. And you can see that, yeah, it's actual like analog, it's a continuous discrete line. It is, you can tell in like some of these darker areas, it's got a little bit more fill in. The IDW one, you can see that there's a little bit more detail in those darker areas, but
yeah, there it is. No reason for that whatsoever, unless somebody just didn't know what they were doing. That is the only reason for this to happen.
Like when you look at like the panel border,
absolutely maddening.
You can see this when you read it. This isn't the worst thing I've seen where it's like immediately recognizable, but there is like I don't know, like it's visible to me, like when the panel border is made of like serrated dots like that. And that with whatever resources were out there, that somewhere out there is at least the negative that they could have used that. And if they're getting more detail out of it, I'm wondering, did they have they had access to some kind of higher fidelity, the original art, or a better scan or something? So then why it's got that dot pattern on it is
I mean, the only reason it ended up half-toned is probably because somebody didn't know better. I mean, that would be my guess. So they probably got a grayscale file from the from the person from the preparer in order for them to be able to scale it and then turn it into a 1-bit image afterwards. Instead of doing that, they didn't.
And so we haven't really done one of these kind of complaints about production in a while, but I thought this comparison here would kind of show why this is something that we kvetch about. I know it's like a specialist thing to our eyes, but when you see him scanned and up this close, you really get a sense of like what kind of damage is being done to, I mean, this master, master, and for like Sean says, no good reason. And especially given the fact that they obviously had, as far as I can tell, a better initial resource to work with. It's just frustrating. I would have to go back. I don't know if I scanned, but I'm not sure that the first Alaxis Press one has that. Let me see really quick. I don't think. Yeah, it is. It is half-toned as well. So I didn't know if that was an IDW thing or just what they're doing, but it's really frustrating. Hopefully at some point IDW will see our videos and just like learn from Sean, because IDW gets all the best projects in terms of like these old cartoons and these kind of books and stuff, and then they always do this halftone thing and it drives me fucking crazy. So IDW, please have your production people watch Sean's tech videos about exporting work, because I love this. I love the projects you have, but god damn it, there's no reason for this. Anyways, rant over.
Yeah, go get some books. I know before we post this, I'm going to go get all of the ones that are available myself, and I'm going to just for good measure pick up the collected Piranesi volume that came out.
I'm gonna have to look at that too. All right, man. You can see how sweaty I am from this COVID stuff.
And we've got another talk later today, so we're going to be able to keep your juice up before then. So it was great to talk to you though, and I hope everybody enjoyed our long ass video about myriad incomprehensible topics. It's a great comic.
Yeah. Thanks, y'all. Bye.
Make sure to like, smash that subscribe button, and ring that bell.